Hi guys, this is Dr. Sadasivam once again with you. And today in this video, we're going to talk about some of the salient features of the interview of Gopal Mahadevan, the CFO of Ashok Leyland with CNBC TV. In fact, the backdrop is that Ashok Leyland has come out with extremely strong Q4 numbers. In fact, the revenue growth is 82%, which is much higher than what was expected earlier. In fact, the company is back in profits after consecutive quarters of being in the red, which means the total revenue for the fourth quarter is somewhere around 15,300 crores. So let us look at some of the salient points that Ashok Mahadevan had to say on it, and he strongly feels that the future growth will largely depend on how the economy will open up after COVID too. Leyland being in the transportation business, it's got a lot of implications in terms of how the lockdown opens, because it's largely about transportation and mobility. Now, in his words, seeing a growth forecast of 9.5% in the GDP, of course, some estimates have slightly revised down from 11 point, etc. But even at 9.5%, it's not a bad number at all. And his opinion is that it must augur very well for the truck business. And he's so confident that green shoots are appearing in the LCV business. And he talks about all the three segments, starting from your LCV business, your second, which is on tippers, and the third, which is the multi-axle segments. Now he talks a lot about the Bada Dost, right, in terms of how successful it had been in the new segment, and the market is continuously on the rise. And apart from that, it's created a segment of its own because of its nature of the product. And over and about that, the spurt in the e-commerce activity is also fueling the sales of LCVs, as they are very critical for the last mile deliveries and dispatches. And secondly, we're going to talk about the heavy intermediate commercial vehicles. Of course, there has been a healthy growth in the sector also, and Ashok Leyland will continue focus on this segment as it has always been doing. And the third is the tipper segment. He's very confident that the tipper sales will keep on increasing because of government's massive investment in the infrastructure. I will be putting up a separate video on investment by the government of India will lead to enormous multiplier effects in the economy. I will be putting some of those videos. I'll be putting the link, and please watch those videos, which will give you significant details in terms of how investment in the infrastructure will boost the economy point of view. But from the Ashok Leyland interview point of view, that investment in the infrastructure will give a big boost to their second line, which is your tippers, etc. So that's largely because of infrastructure projects, and they will continue to grow, right? Apart from that, there is one more factor which is playing a very important part, which is the real estate. And most of those real estate is now springing back to life. Resuscitation is happening because of some of the initiatives of the government in the real estate sector. And with all that coming, Leyland will be able to see a good growth in the tipper segment also. As far as the multi-axle segments are concerned, they are largely used for interstate transportation, be it passenger or goods. And when the lockdowns opens, that will have a significant impact on sales. So some of the strategies that Ashok Leyland has is he's outlining some of the strategies right now. More than understanding the strategies, of course, that is important. The second is from a training perspective. There is lots and lots of training perspective, learnings, especially in terms of how leaders craft their strategies, because in all my videos I've given you interviews of eminent people from the industry, corporate honchos. Along with that, we take some strong training lessons from them. For example, in the last interview with Dr. Pavan Goenka, remember that? And Rajesh Jajurikar, we had taken up this concept of 3-box strategy by Vinod Govindarajan, and we had put up a separate video on what a 3-box strategy means. So one thing is to understand what Mahindra or Leyland have in terms of strategy and how they will implement those strategies in their line of business. But secondly, what is important is understand these strategies so that you will be able to customize them, you will be able to learn, you implement them in your line of business, being a top honcho in your own line of business, because we take up all these issues along with all these case studies in our training program. So coming back to some of these strategies that Gopal Mahadevan has pointed out, we will talk about that. He says one of their strategies is to prepare for this growth of LCVs. Obviously, one cannot be complacent that you have achieved good volumes and you cannot afford to remain complacent. So you need to prepare for further growth of LCVs. That is number one. Number two is they will continue their touch points with customers, with dealers in terms of multi-axles, in terms of what is happening at the grassroots levels, how is the emerging demand is coming up, how they can do capacity planning, etc. They will continue, do all this, being in touch with customers and dealers. Some tweaking will keep happening on the LCVs. Now, there are certain things that need to be kept in mind as far as the future is concerned. One is your hydrogen cells. In fact, various companies like Tata, in fact, Hyundai has already outlined their plans in terms of how they will go ahead. I will try to put up a separate video in terms of what Hyundai is planning for hydrogen powered vehicles and non-conventional energy. Some of that is already out on the press, and I will do a little bit of research on Tata and Hyundai, and if possible, I'm also in touch with some officials. I will try to put that as a separate video. But for now, this Gopal Mahadevan feels that the future is going to be a mix of all. In his strong opinion, one cannot grow at the expense of another, because each one of these should continue to grow and capabilities need to be built both in IC as well as electric vehicles. That's what his opinion is, because clearly there is a message. I'm not very sure if that was his intention, but I see a very clear message from him saying that they will continue to invest in IC engines as well as electric vehicles, because future proofing of the business is important, and therefore Ashok Leyland will continue with all these EV initiatives, but at the same time they will not lose sight of IC engines, because IC engines are here to stay for a considerable amount of time. Not that in the next 1 or 2 years IC engines will obsolete, at least another 1 decade, 2 decades, we don't know. So Ashok Leyland will keep their legs on the IC engines, though he is not very explicitly stated, but somewhere I got this message from that interview. So they are also coming up with other initiatives as far as EV vehicles are concerned. I'm sure you are all aware that they have introduced a switch initiative, and 91% of that company will be owned by Ashok Leyland, and separate initiatives for IC and diesel will keep continuing, and there will be another initiative for electric vehicles also in the form of switch. Right? And he's clearly shared his plans, outlined his plans in terms of how this subsidiary in India will work on electric vehicles, and they will strive to make it a manufacturing hub for the world. So this switch will cater to the Indian market, not just the Indian market, but they will cater to SAARC and the adjacent markets also. And he strongly believes that India will continue to be a very, very important market as far as the EV vehicles are concerned. Because he commented a lot about government steps in terms of how much the government is putting its efforts in order to ensure that electric vehicles are a success and pollution comes down, and Leyland is going from strength to strength, both because of the initiatives of the government of India and also because of their own management strategies. Now, we have talked about the electric vehicles, we have talked about the IC engines. As far as hydrogen and fuel is concerned, that is another alternative form of fuel, and Ashok Leyland, of course, readying up for that also. Now comes a very, very important aspect of commodity prices. We have seen that increasing in the last 1 year, 3 or 4 quarters. We have seen rising in all the metals like steel, zinc, aluminum, etc. Not just the metals, but also rare metals in terms of palladium, rhodium, platinum, all those which are used in your exhaust vehicles. With more and more V6 vehicles coming, all those rare metals are also important. All these have pushed the input costs to much higher levels. Now, as far as Mahadevan is concerned, he talks about three important things, guys. Prices are a factor. Three things are very. One is your revenues, cost of input raw materials, and third is how you manage the middle line. Very important. Very good strategy. In fact, very impressed with this strategy of Mahadevan. And he says that any company needs to manage their middle line as efficiently as possible. Your middle line is your cost reduction, your productivity enhancement, your Kaizen, your optimization of your resources. All that will form part of the middle line. And you need to work on those areas, and at the same time you need to work on the top line, which is your revenues. You need to see constantly take initiatives which can increase your market share. Your volumes have to go up to bring in those economies of scale, and of course the cost of materials. As fast as the input costs are concerned, because your price is a function of all the three. Of course, negotiation will happen with suppliers. They'll also have their own approach to negotiations, economies of scale, vendor supplier relationships, synergy. All that is important. They can be taken into consideration, but beyond a point, nothing much can be done as far as the input prices are concerned. Therefore, you need to judiciously balance between three. We have talked about top line, the middle line, your bottom line, your operational enhancement, your productivity enhancement, etc. And the price of input also needs to be controlled. And of course, the top line, you need to keep an eye on all that. So all those three things will continue to happen, and one can hope that during the later part of the year, when the steel and the commodity prices cool off, already it's peaking now, right? At that time, Leyland will be able to take full advantage of these strategies, but nobody is very sure if the prices will cool off. Some are talking about a super cycle in iron and steel. You can see the steel prices of Jindal, JSW, Tata Steel, how much they have grown up. They have grown 3-4 folds, right? Tata Steel is selling at 1100 as we are talking now. 8 months back it was available at 300. So the outcome of all this is quite significant in the increase in the input costs as far as the automotive companies are concerned, and it will have a direct bearing on the final price in which the cars are sold. And it's a very demand elastic product, whether it is trucks or car, and all these have a huge significance because any automotive product is highly demand elastic. But companies will continue their strategies, and certain strategies have been outlined, and they are extremely important from the shareholders' perspective in terms of investments, whether it is retail investments or institutional investments. These things are extremely important in terms of what Ashok Leyland is doing as a strategy to confront the strategy. But at the same time, as a trainer myself, my focus is on the theoretical aspects of what he said, like much like Pawan Goenka came up with that 3-box framework from an academic perspective. These things, top line, bottom line, and bottom line. And Gopal Mahadevan, thank you so much. You have outlined an excellent strategy for Ashok Leyland and your theory of 3 things: how you manage your middle line, how you reduce your input costs, and at the same time, what steps you have taken to improve your volumes, that is the top line. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mahadevan. And this is as far as the Ashok Leyland strategies are concerned, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And this is Dr. Sadasivam signing off till we meet again. Jai Hind. Bye-bye.